What's going on, guys? This is Martyrs Brigade 99 coming to you once again with another session of Bloodborne commentary. Alright guys, in this particular video we're just going to talk about my strength build and a lot of other randomness. Alright, so this is my strength character. Level 85. Yeah, you heard it, 85. It has 45 in strength, 45 in vitality, and the minimum requirements for the Ligarius will. Now actually I created this build around the Ligarius will. Right now I know some of you guys may say to yourself like, well, why the Ligarius will? Well, because that's the only weapon out of the strength weapons that requires some type of stat investment other than strength or skill, right? Because I think you need like a minimum of 10 arcane. So I basically went with the violent past and had to make a few investments in the arcane, right? Now, at least to me, this particular build is really viable. The only challenge, well actually before I start talking about that, let's just kind of get into some barriers to really getting good with my strength build, right? Because I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with the pattern, right? A new Souls games come out. Everyone flocked to the katana. You know, they want to be the first ones to go find the katana, find out how OP it is. And if it's not as OP as it was in previous games, they're looking for the next best things. Well, seeing that that has been the pattern in most past games, I decided to go straight to strength, right? Because I really want to get proficient with the strength build. But one of the obstacles to becoming proficient with it is the lack of upgrade materials. Now, some of you guys may say, well, Brigade, why would that be a barrier? Well, I mean, a strength build, at least in my mind, is not limited to one weapon or even two weapons. It's at least two weapons, right? So in my arsenal, you know, I'm dealing with the Ligarius will, obviously the Kirk hammer. If I can get enough upgrade materials, then I'm going to go ahead and upgrade, what do you call that? It's like the Hunter's Axe. The mace, I know it's not called the mace, but I don't have the exact name in front of me. And a few other weapons. You know, I believe the Beast Claw is a strength weapon. I'm not really sure. I don't have the stats of those in front of me. But one of the barriers is the lack of upgrade materials. Yes, there's a lot of, you know, the twin blood, whatever those things are called. But the blood chunks, it is so difficult to farm those, right, that it really have a negative impact on my ability to really get into my strength build. Now, the situation is so bad to where, now, and actually I already know what some of you guys are going to say. Some of you guys are probably going to say, well, Brigade, you know, I mean, there it is no big deal. There you go talking again. All you have to do is go up, all you have to do is go up to the top of the upper cathedral where there's like 4 or 5 wolves and you can farm. Okay, yes, they can drop chunks, but the rate at which they drop chunks is probably just as bad as Dark Souls 1, right? Farming for Titanite slabs. Now, at least in Dark Souls 1, when you would farm the Dark Wraiths, you know, if they didn't drop a slab, at least you can get chunks. But in this game, getting chunks is just about as rare, as I said before, as trying to get slabs, you know, in Dark Souls 1, or even the, I believe, what was that? I think it was like pure blade stone that you got out of 4-2 in Demon Souls. About the same rarity. So that's really an obstacle, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to be testing the weapon's viability, right, with +7 and +8 weapons. I'm not going to be doing that. Now, you know, must they be at +10? No, they don't. It isn't necessary for them to be at +10. But if they're not going to be at +10, then I at least need to have them at +9. Now, on my first playthrough for my strength build, I actually tried my hardest not to go to New Game Plus. So I got my Ligarius will to +10. I got my Kirk hammer to +9. I farmed all the blood gems that I wanted. Got some decent ones. But at the end of the day, I wanted to deal with the hunter's axe and a few other weapons. So I had to go to New Game Plus. And, actually, I think it was faster for me to go ahead and go all the way through New Game Plus than it would have been for me to farm all the chunks that I would need from those wolves, right? So I really think they need to do something about the drop rates. If they don't increase the drop rates of the chunks, then I think they at least need to sell them, right? Either have them be available on the, I forgot where, in that little tub, where you go use Insight, or just go ahead and use Blood Echoes, right? Because in previous games, there were easier ways to get access to chunks. Now, if you don't want to have an access of blood rocks, well, that's one thing. But chunks, I mean, come on, bruh. We don't need no artificial barriers, because you guys are kind of limiting the amount of chunks we can get. All right, so that's one of the barriers. So enough about that. Now, with my strength build, let's just talk about a few things. Some of the ways in which I can improve my own gameplay, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys will think the same. You have to look at both your strengths and weaknesses, right? One of the strengths I have, at least at this point, is trying my hardest to not fall into the trap. If you guys pay close attention to my gameplay, you guys would notice that I'm really practicing on my space and timing. Now, no matter how much you may like the PvP in this game, you cannot deny that most PvP matches lack depth. You cannot deny that they lack depth. Now, this is not a representation of PvP as a whole, but I am talking about many of the matches. Now, that's not a bad thing. Bloodborne is still brand new. PvP and Dark Souls 1 lacked depth in the beginning. For a lot of people who are around in the early days of Dark Souls 1, it was basically R1 spam with the lightning washing pole, or it was a Claymore R1 spam, or a Moonlight Greatsword R1 spam. That's all it was, And it was only up until the time where more and more players started to learn the parry timings when things started to shift, and it caused players to play differently and react differently. Right, so we're basically in that beginning stage of Bloodborne, whereas 8 out of 10 matches are basically R1 spam, shoot, 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 R1 spam, shoot, shoot, R1 spam, shoot, 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 shoot. Actually, I forgot to add a few heals, right? But it is what it is, at least in this stage. Until we can get some actual duels, I mean, I'm not going to make too many complaints about healing. I mean, because hell, there are times when I heal myself. So, I mean, who cares at this point? There's no red soapstone summon signs. There's no arena. There's no way where we can make arranged duels. So I don't really care about healing, but I'm trying to master space and timing, especially with the strength weapons. In all previous Souls games, that was always an issue as it related to strength weapons. A lot of people in Dark Souls 1 stayed away from strength weapons because, they were kind of difficult to deal with. They were easily, roll BS'd. But, I mean, for you guys that are familiar with my channel, you guys will know that I've dealt with strength weapons. And actually, I can give you a couple references. The first reference is, why would you need dexterity when you have strength? That was when I started out in Dark Souls 1. Trying to get good with strength weapons. Another reference was I believe it was a Rumble in the Jungle series with myself and Artorias88, right? And in that series of matches, I dabbled a little bit and showcased a little strength weapons PvP. So it's kind of always, as a matter of fact, I mean, it's pretty much the same with me. Like in both Dark Souls 1, and even in this game, my thing was always to spark creativity, because right now what I've seen mostly is, the katana, obviously, the burial blade, obviously, and I forgot those 2 razor type things that you get from the crow. Right, that's what I see, a crap ton of those. And as a matter of fact, I think I see those more than any other weapon. Now, shout out to PVP Skills. I know he's pretty good with that spear. I watch a couple videos of his, and that guy's pretty good. As a matter of fact, if you guys are familiar with him, just go ahead and check out his channel. I'll actually put a link to his channel in the description. He hasn't really done that many Bloodborne oriented videos, but if you just take the time to watch what he's doing, especially with that spear, it's pretty impressive. I mean, he really demonstrates space and timing. As a matter of fact, speaking of space and timing, let's look at a particular match. Right, and one thing that really got me on the whole space and timing is, this invader, and he's got like a crow set, and he's using those two ridiculous razors, and that guy was so good with the damn space and timing, like I almost couldn't hit him, and after sitting back and looking at that match, and just kind of reflecting on it, I said, holy crap, that guy's really good with dodging, he's really good with timing his attacks. And I actually want to get that way. So shout out to that guy. I don't really remember his name, but I'll make sure to include clips of it in this particular video. And there's one guy, he's got the crow set with the two knives. And he's really good at dodging and timing his attacks. All right, so that's one thing that I'm working on. Because it's kind of easy to fall into the trap. And I think you guys know what trap I'm talking about. The one wherein, you basically meet up. You kind of, just strafe around a couple seconds, and then the person pull out his fastest weapon and they just R1 spam you. And basically the other person just try to dodge and they shoot a bullet a few times because they want to parry, and basically that's it. Well, I want a little more depth. So that's, I think, one of the strengths that I have, trying to resist that urge to get into an R1 competition. And I think forcing myself to use strength weapons will help me do that. So if I'm paying attention to space and timing with the strength weapons, then that should automatically follow on to the skill-based weapons, which will be, one of my next builds that I create. All right, so that's one of the good things. One of the bad things, one of my weaknesses I'm noticing is that I'm not incorporating much use of the firearms. Now, I understand why I do it, and I already know what some of you guys are going to say. It's a new game, you got to incorporate it. Okay. But at least in my mind, the firearms do so little damage that it's hard for me to really justify its use. Now, I already know what some of you guys are going to say. You're going to say, well, Brigade, I have blood tinge. And, blood tinge, you can, okay, but every build is not a blood tinge. So I'm basically talking to people who are not blood tinge. It's kind of hard for me to justify the use, at least in my mind, to justify the use of firearms a lot. Seeing that, at least to me, they feel more like a nuisance than anything. Had they been a little more effective as far as damage was concerned, then perhaps I can see myself. Because in other words, even if I can't get the parry, at least I'm knocking off, 100, 125 points. But that's not the case. And a lot of the times where I've used it and have missed, I'm only inflicting like 20 damage. So at least in my mind, it's not really an effective tool in my arsenal. But I do know that using them would more than likely get me more, well, not more than likely, but they will get me more parries, because that's the only way you can parry in this game. So that's one of the weaknesses. Another weakness that I have is trying to learn the parry timings. You guys are going to notice in one of these matches where I was in one of the nightmare areas, and this guy was just spamming the shit out of that damn greatsword, and I was trying my hardest to get the parry timings. But unlike Dark Souls 2, and Demon Souls, it's not just as easy as, some asshole swinging, you learning the parry timings, and then you parry appropriately. You also have to take into account distance and the time that it takes for your round to connect to the R1 spamming target. In other words, if I'm up close, more than likely I'll be able to get the parry. But the further I am out, I have to kind of sync, my firearm bullet with the rhythm of the guy swinging. So that makes it even more difficult. All right, so it is what it is right there. So those are basically my weaknesses, and I'm going to try to work to improve on those things. So I'm not really going to make this video too long. I just wanted to showcase my strength build for a little bit. I'll be doing a few videos on the strength build, and then I'm going to go ahead and work on creating a skill build. And I'll basically be doing the same thing, space and timing, right? Because I really want to try to create, and as a matter of fact, this has really been consistent if you look at one of the first videos I created on Dark Souls 2, I think it was called Tactics Are Far Better Than R1 Spamming or something like that. So it's always been the same with me. And I'm going to go ahead and continue that theme on to Bloodborne, right? Space and timing. That's what it's going to be about with me. All right, guys. So, hey, I hope you guys enjoy the commentary. Go ahead and make your comments, like, sub, share this, pass it on. Let's start a dialogue. Let's get the conversation rolling. All right, guys. So, hey, until next time, Martyr's Brigade is